As the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows over the Mediterranean Sea on April 18, 1943, the skies above Tunisia's Cape Bon became the staging ground for an exceptionally uneven aerial clash. Around 1500 hours, a devastating engagement commenced that would rapidly strip the Luftwaffe of anywhere from 24 to 59 transport planes, depending on the historical accounts you consult. This extraordinarily fierce confrontation would soon be permanently etched into history by American aviators as the Palm Sunday Massacre. While official German archives verified the destruction of 24 Junkers Ju-52 transports, alongside 35 damaged airframes, pilots from the United States estimated their kills to be between 50 and 70 machines. Ultimately, the exact tally was eclipsed by the profound psychological shockwave the event generated across enemy ranks. In a mere 15 minutes of fierce fighting, the Curtiss P-40 Warhawks showcased such absolute dominance over the skies that the foundational German beliefs regarding their inevitable victory started to rapidly disintegrate. The impending skirmish placed 47 Warhawks and 12 Royal Air Force Spitfires in direct opposition to a massive flight of 65 Ju-52 cargo planes, which were guarded by roughly 15 Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters and 4 or 5 Bf-110s. What followed was an unmitigated disaster for the German aerial armada, resulting in at least 24 downed transports, 35 heavily battered cargo ships, and the loss of 10 escort fighters, contrasted against a meager Allied sacrifice of 6 P-40s and a single Spitfire. When you analyze this staggering exchange rate, it signified far more than a simple battlefield triumph. It served as a brutal awakening to an American aerial hegemony that the Axis High Command had previously dismissed as unachievable. Unbeknownst to the Axis air crews navigating the hostile skies that fateful Palm Sunday, their entire communication network had been thoroughly penetrated by the highly classified ultra-intelligence program. Furthermore, these unsuspecting aviators were completely unaware that their American adversaries had relentlessly drilled for this exact scenario, proving that the industrial democratic society the Germans had been conditioned to despise was entirely capable of forging lethal, highly methodical combatants. Entering the spring of 1943, the strategic footing of the Africa Corps within the Tunisian theater had deteriorated into a tremendously precarious situation. Caught in a crushing vice between General Montgomery's 8th Army surging from the east and the relentless push of American troops from the west, approximately 250,000 Italian and German soldiers found themselves entirely reliant upon an airborne logistical lifeline. At the same time, the surrounding Mediterranean waters had been transformed into a watery tomb for Axis maritime convoys, with Allied squadrons launching from Malta, obliterating enemy freighters at a pace that could not possibly be sustained. To completely sever this crucial airborne supply chain, the Allies initiated Operation Flax on the 5th of April, 1943, marking a significant shift in their tactical approach. Rather than relying on random skirmishes, this new initiative delivered a highly coordinated blockade, fueled directly by the clandestine Ultra network. Cryptanalysts stationed at Bletchley Park were deciphering enemy transmissions almost instantaneously, essentially handing British and American fighter groups a comprehensive blueprint of Axis flight timetables, navigational pathways, and the precise strength of their defensive escorts. In a desperate bid to maintain their foothold, the Luftwaffe mobilized every single cargo plane at their disposal to sustain the North African campaign. The central pillar of this massive logistical undertaking was the Junkers Ju-52 trimotor, an incredibly dependable machine that had previously supported fascist operations spanning from the Spanish Civil War to the airborne invasion of Crete. Consequently, by that crucial month, fleets of these robust aircraft were conducting several perilous round trips daily between Sicilian air bases and Tunisian drop zones, ferrying essential munitions while extracting injured troops and high-value specialists. Despite the looming threats, The German High Command operated under the illusion that their aerial convoys were adequately shielded from enemy interference. To evade radar sweeps, the cumbersome planes skimmed perilously close to the waves, frequently navigating a mere 50 feet above the sea's surface, all while receiving vigilant protection from veteran fighter wings, such as Jagdgeschwader 27 and Jagdgeschwader 53. They even continuously altered their departure schedules to eliminate recognizable routines. However, as you might realize, every single one of these meticulous safeguards was rendered entirely useless against an adversary silently intercepting every whispered transmission. During the fateful afternoon of April 18, 1943, an extensive armada of German cargo aircraft was making its way back toward Sicily following a successful resupply drop in North Africa. This sprawling convoy was composed of 65 Ju-52 planes clustered into rigid, mutually supportive defensive arrangements, shadowed closely by highly proficient aviators belonging to the 2nd Squadron of Jagdgeschwader 27 and select flights from Jagdgeschwader 53. The men piloting these Guardian fighters were thoroughly battle-hardened veterans of the sprawling desert war, possessing extensive combat records adorned with numerous confirmed aerial kills. Nevertheless, the Axis defensive screen grappled with a critical vulnerability that would ultimately guarantee their downfall: severely restricted fuel reserves. Pushed to the absolute limits of their operational range, the Bf-109 interceptors arrived over the perilous Cape, possessing a mere 20 to 30 minutes of reserve propellant for active maneuvering. Should they be drawn into a prolonged dogfight, the pilots would be forced to abandon their lumbering charges, or face the grim prospect of crashing into the unforgiving ocean, creating a severe tactical handicap that Allied commanders, fully briefed via intercepted communiques, planned to exploit with merciless precision. Meanwhile, the aviators of the 57th Fighter Group had spent weeks meticulously readying themselves for exactly this type of monumental clash. Operating out of the LGM airfield facility in Tunisia, they had dedicated countless hours to mastering the specific tactics required to dismantle massive airborne convoys. For this decisive strike, the group mobilized its entire roster of squadrons alongside the 314th Fighter Squadron, amassing a formidable strike force of 47 P-40 Warhawks, which were strategically shielded from above by 12 Royal Air Force Spitfires deployed from No. 92 Squadron. Although the P-40 Warhawk was far from the most technologically superior interceptor in the United States arsenal, it had undergone rigorous modifications, specifically tailored for the harsh realities of the Mediterranean theater. Upgraded supercharger systems significantly bolstered the aircraft's high-altitude capabilities, while its formidable array of 6 50-caliber machine guns had been painstakingly recalibrated to converge lethally at a distance of exactly 250 yards, which was the absolute perfect striking distance for shredding heavy cargo planes. Right around 1500 hours, the sprawling German aerial train was visually acquired, trudging in a northeasterly direction toward the Sicilian coast at an astonishingly low elevation, with historical accounts placing them anywhere between 50 and 1,000 feet above the waves. The lumbering cargo carriers were tightly packed into interlocking V-shapes, a traditional defensive posture that had historically shielded them from concentrated fighter assaults in earlier campaigns. Yet, under these specific circumstances, this dense clustering would rapidly transform into an inescapable slaughterhouse. The incoming American and British squadrons had orchestrated their approach flawlessly, maneuvering the P-40S to an altitude of roughly 4,000 feet while the Spitfires held a commanding overwatch at 15,000 feet. By keeping the blinding glare of the descending sun directly at their backs, the attackers rendered themselves nearly invisible to the enemy until the trap was already sprung. Conversely, the Axis flight, hugging the ocean's surface, was starkly outlined against the shimmering Mediterranean waters, offering the diving interceptors perfectly illuminated and unmistakable silhouettes to target. As the Allied forces initiated their devastating swoop, the German fighter screen was forced into a completely unwinnable dilemma: ascending to meet the threat would incinerate their meager fuel reserves and leave the cargo ships entirely exposed, whereas remaining near the deck surrendered all kinetic advantages to the plummeting attackers. The Axis flight leader valiantly opted to fight, commanding his escorts to pull up and challenge the incoming American barrage in what proved to be a courageous but completely hopeless maneuver. What ensued immediately afterward resembled a systematic execution rather than a traditional dogfight, as continuous waves of warhawks plunged violently into the transport ranks, with every single pilot picking out his prey and unleashing destruction with chilling, methodical accuracy. The defensive armaments equipped on the G-52S, generally consisting of a single 13mm machine gun mounted dorsally, alongside two 7.92mm weapons positioned in the beam windows, demonstrated a complete inability to withstand the destructive force of the attacking 50 caliber guns. Allied aviators reported observing the occupants of these German transport planes endeavoring to protect their vessels by discharging personal firearms, including rifles and submachine guns, directly out of the cabin windows. Although this frantic opposition showcased remarkable bravery, it remained utterly ineffectual against interceptors executing rapid, high-velocity strafing runs. Furthermore, the fragile aluminum plating of the G-52S provided absolutely zero shielding from the incoming 50 caliber projectiles. Meanwhile, the accompanying German fighter escorts engaged in a frantic struggle, ultimately finding themselves completely outmatched by overwhelming enemy quantities and an unfavorable tactical position. As you might imagine, the Spitfires intentionally occupied these defenders high above, deliberately clearing the way for the P-4s and P-40s to mercilessly dismantle the vulnerable transport fleet closer to the surface. German aviators subsequently recounted the intense agony of witnessing the total annihilation of the aircraft they were tasked to protect, all while they desperately battled a vastly larger force simply to stay alive. In a matter of mere minutes, the ocean below transformed into a graveyard, scattered with flaming debris, as several transports detonated mid-flight, others plunged directly into the waves, and numerous pilots initiated hazardous emergency landings along the shores of Sicily. Subsequent assessments from German authorities acknowledged the outright destruction of 24 G-52s, alongside 35 additional planes that sustained such extensive damage they were permanently grounded. Official documents recorded the immediate toll from the transport fleet as 20 aviators deceased, 28 injured, and 50 individuals unaccounted for, although it is highly probable these figures reflected solely the flight crews rather than the onboard passengers. These vulnerable aircraft transported far more than their standard operators, harboring vital ground staff, administrative officials, evacuated casualties, and highly specialized technicians possessing invaluable skills. Consequently, the obliteration of each vessel signified not merely a catastrophic depletion of military hardware, but a profound human disaster. The victims largely consisted of essential support teams rather than frontline infantry, encompassing maintenance mechanics, radio operators, and medical professionals, whose sudden absence crippled the broader German war effort just as severely as losing frontline combat battalions. Conversely, American casualties remained remarkably minimal, suffering the loss of just 6 P-40s and a single Spitfire, resulting in the death or capture of those respective airmen. This dramatic contrast in casualties, yielding a kill ratio ranging from at least 4-1 to potentially 10-1, based on varying historical estimates, emphatically illustrated the absolute tactical dominance secured by the Allied forces. Recently unsealed archives have since illuminated the indispensable contribution of ultra-intelligence in orchestrating the Palm Sunday massacre. Cryptanalysts working for the Allies had successfully decoded comprehensive itineraries of the German transport movements several days prior to the engagement, ensuring that American strategists possessed exact knowledge regarding the volume of enemy planes, their designated flight paths, the density of their protective escorts, and precisely what cargo they carried. Armed with this unparalleled informational supremacy, intercepting squadrons could achieve the most advantageous aerial placements imaginable. When the German formations finally materialized, the Allied fighters were already loitering at the perfect altitude and waiting in pristine strike positions. Mission planners had rigorously computed fuel requirements to ensure prolonged dogfighting capabilities, and even the specific blend of ammunition, combining armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer projectiles, was meticulously tailored to obliterate large transport vessels. Astonishingly, the Germans harbored no suspicions that their encrypted communications network had been entirely compromised. Subsequent interrogations conducted after the war disclosed that Axis commanders attributed the devastating ambush to mere happenstance, or the vigilance of local shoreline spotters. The concept that the Enigma cipher had been defeated simply never entered their minds, thereby granting the Allies uninterrupted leverage from this strategic breakthrough for the remainder of the conflict. Back at the Luftwaffe headquarters situated in Rome, the initial dispatches detailing the catastrophe encountered profound skepticism. Command staff presumed that the reported casualty figures were wildly inflated, or that battlefield hysteria had distorted the facts. However, as corroborating evidence flooded in from returning pilots, Italian eyewitnesses, and German naval vessels rescuing the few survivors, the sheer magnitude of the disaster transformed into an undeniable reality. Recognizing the severity of the situation, General Field Marshal Albert Kessler, overseeing the German Mediterranean forces, promptly halted all daytime supply flights. His official military journal entry for April 18th succinctly captured the grim circumstances, noting the daylight transport missions had become entirely unfeasible and restricting all future flights to the cover of darkness. Unsurprisingly, Hitler reacted to the news with volcanic outrage, demanding immediate courts-martial for the defensive commanders and slandering the deceased transport pilots as cowards, while simultaneously mandating a rapid influx of fighter planes to the Mediterranean theater. Directives that proved practically impossible to execute, considering the heavily depleted state of German military resources. Ultimately, the Palm Sunday massacre brought a definitive conclusion to daylight aerial deliveries supplying German troops stationed in Tunisia. When coupled with the ongoing strangulation of maritime sea routes, this devastating blow severed the vital supply chain of the Africa Corps during an exceptionally critical juncture. Military formations that had stubbornly defended their perimeters despite severe equipment deficits were suddenly staring down the barrel of total logistical disintegration. General Hans-Jürgen Phonim, the commander overseeing Army Group Africa, instantly grasped the terrifying ramifications of this event. He realized that deprived of airborne reinforcements and provisions, his entrenched forces possessed the endurance to survive for merely a few additional weeks. Consequently, the total capitulation of Axis forces across North Africa on May 13, 1943, occurring barely a month following the events of Palm Sunday, was drastically expedited by the insurmountable transportation crisis ignited by this aerial slaughter. Transcending the immediate tactical fallout, you can see how this monumental clash definitively asserted American dominion over the Mediterranean skies. German ground troops, who had previously relied entirely upon Luftwaffe overwatch for their maneuvers, suddenly realized they would have to continue the war entirely devoid of aerial protection, delivering a devastating psychological strike that shattered morale across the entire Wehrmacht. Furthermore, the engagement exposed shocking technological inequalities that deeply rattled the surviving Axis participants. The P-40 Warhawk, an aircraft routinely dismissed as antiquated by German intelligence analysts, exhibited performance metrics that completely defied enemy expectations, utilizing upgraded engines to dominate altitudes previously deemed unreachable for that specific model. Advanced targeting sights facilitated a level of gunnery precision that Axis reports described as almost supernatural. But the most foundational advantage lay in the flawless reliability of American radio communications. Because every single P-40 aviator could converse transparently with their wingmen and flight leaders, they executed highly synchronized assaults that remained entirely impossible for German squadrons constantly hindered by electronic malfunctions. Ultimately, this fundamental technological supremacy in battlefield communication directly translated into a crushing tactical superiority, further cemented by highly superior American maintenance and logistical frameworks. Operating high above Cape Bon, the American P-40 squadrons maintained exceptional combat readiness despite the harsh desert environment, benefiting from an endless stream of spare parts, fuel, and ammunition. You can contrast this directly with the German units, which suffered from severe chronic deficits across all essential supplies. However, the most critical difference between the two sides lay in the sheer quality of their pilot preparation. Before ever seeing combat, American aviators logged an average of over 300 flight hours, mastering formation tactics, aerial gunnery, and navigation within the secure airspace of the United States, allowing them to arrive in the theater already highly proficient. Conversely, German recruits were rushed through drastically shortened training regimens because fuel scarcity severely limited their time in the air. The rigorous instruction that had once guaranteed the Luftwaffe's early dominance completely disintegrated as veteran instructors were reassigned to combat duty and training planes were seized for frontline operations. You will notice this capability gap only widened as the conflict dragged on. By late 1943, incoming American pilots boasted roughly 400 hours of experience, while their German counterparts averaged a mere 80. When you analyze the events of the Palm Sunday massacre, it becomes clear that this was not a random anomaly, but rather a devastating component of the relentless Operation Flax campaign that foreshadowed the systematic dismantling of the German Air Force. Well before that fateful day, Allied fighter squadrons had already inflicted heavy casualties on the enemy supply lines, obliterating 14 Ju-52 transports and crippling numerous others on April 5th. The aerial onslaught continued without pause, resulting in the destruction of 20 more transport planes during a massive fighter sweep on April 10th. Just over a week later, on April 19th, the day following the Palm Sunday slaughter, squadrons from the South African Air Force successfully intercepted and shot down 16 Italian SM-82 supply aircraft. This systematic eradication of Axis supply lines reached its absolute climax on April 22nd, when Allied interceptors caught a vulnerable flight of Me-323 Gigantes, which were colossal, 6-engine machines recognized as the largest aircraft operating in the Mediterranean theater. Out of 16 Gigantes in the formation, 14 were blown out of the sky, sending 12 tons of desperately needed aviation fuel per aircraft plunging into the sea. Only 19 men survived out of the 138 crew members aboard those doomed Leviathans. Losing more than 100 transport planes in under 3 weeks permanently crippled the German aerial supply chain across every active war zone, dealing a catastrophic blow from which the Luftwaffe's transport division would never successfully recover. The sheer volume of downed aircraft during the Palm Sunday engagements severely diminished the Luftwaffe's operational effectiveness, but the eradication of veteran air crews proved far more devastating than the loss of the airframes themselves. Every destroyed Ju-52 typically carried a highly seasoned pilot, a co-pilot, and a specialized radio operator or gunner, taking with them thousands of hours of irreplaceable aviation expertise that required years to cultivate. As you might imagine, the psychological toll on the surviving German forces was utterly paralyzing. Supply pilots, who had once navigated the skies with relative safety, now realized they were piloting flying coffins, while fighter squadrons experienced the bitter frustration of being entirely unable to shield their vulnerable escorts, and ground battalions were forced to accept the grim reality that they could no longer rely on aerial resupply. The unmitigated disaster over Cape Bon forced the German High Command into a terrifying realization. The battle for the skies had already been decisively lost. It became glaringly obvious that if the Luftwaffe could not shield its own supply planes in broad daylight, it possessed no hope of defending German civilian centers against the inevitably approaching Allied bomber offensive, making the Mediterranean slaughter a dark omen for the destruction of Germany itself. For the United States military, however, this overwhelming triumph served as absolute vindication of their comprehensive approach to modern warfare. Their overwhelming tactical superiority was the direct result of methodical training, advanced technology, and unmatched industrial manufacturing. Young American citizens, whom the Nazi regime had confidently dismissed as the soft products of a decadent democracy, had decisively demonstrated a terrifying and lethal efficiency on the battlefield. Following the engagement, the 57th Fighter Group was honored with a Distinguished Unit Citation, and several individual aviators instantly achieved ace status by securing multiple kills in a single, chaotic dogfight. Beyond the medals and official accolades, you can see how this monumental victory injected American air crews with a profound confidence that propelled them through the remainder of the conflict. The engagement also unequivocally validated the United States core tactical doctrine, which prioritized rigorous teamwork, strict fire discipline, and overarching mission success above the pursuit of individual glory. Naturally, both warring factions attempted to weaponize the Palm Sunday engagement for propaganda purposes, though they achieved wildly different results. American audiences cheered as newsreels displayed thrilling gun camera footage of detonating German aircraft, boldly branded with titles like Easter Egg Hunt over Tunisia, which vividly broadcasted Allied air supremacy to the world. In stark contrast, the German propaganda machine stumbled desperately to spin the catastrophe, initially attempting to deny the severe casualties until neutral observers publicly verified the staggering American claims. Once the survivors' harrowing testimonies completely debunked fabricated stories of Italian sabotage or sudden mechanical failures, Axis media reluctantly pivoted, framing the annihilated crews as noble martyrs who sacrificed themselves to supply surrounded comrades. However, the grim truth circulated rapidly through the ranks of the Wehrmacht, where disillusioned soldiers swapped dark jokes about the Luftwaffe's fragile Easter eggs that cracked at the slightest touch, and popular songs began mocking German intelligence. The carefully constructed illusion of German aerial invincibility, which had been meticulously built since the Spanish Civil War, definitively perished in the skies above Cape Bon. The shockwaves of this tactical disaster rattled Adolf Hitler so profoundly that he hastily diverted vital fighter squadrons from the Eastern Front to the Mediterranean, inadvertently crippling his own forces right before the pivotal Battle of Kursk. Meanwhile, fueled by their monumental triumph, the Allies aggressively accelerated their timeline for the invasion of Sicily and the impending daylight bombardment of the German homeland. As you look back at the historical record, it is clear that the massacre served as a grim wake-up call for Axis military strategists, perfectly illustrating the fatal danger of underestimating the United States. German commanders who had previously scoffed at Americans as inexperienced combatants were forced to acknowledge that an unmatched industrial engine had forged an extraordinarily capable fighting force, which ultimately convinced many dissenting German officers that the war was unwinnable, spurring them toward active resistance against the regime. When you explore the archives of the Second World War, you will quickly discover that experts widely regard the Palm Sunday massacre as one of the most incredibly lopsided aerial clashes in modern history. Although scholars continue to argue over the precise casualty figures, with Axis logs indicating 24 J-52s annihilated and 35 crippled, compared to United States reports claiming up to 70 kills, the profound operational and strategic consequences of this event remain crystal clear. This fierce encounter established fundamental doctrines that would dictate the course of airborne combat for the rest of the global conflict, proving conclusively that holding an edge in intelligence, paves the way for devastating surprise attacks. It became evident that advanced technology must be leveraged relentlessly. High-quality preparation trumps mere time spent on the front lines. Seamlessly coordinated maneuvers overpower solitary brilliance, and sheer manufacturing might directly fuels battlefield supremacy. Consequently, today's aerospace branches routinely analyze this event as a masterclass in severing supply lines, viewing this methodical obliteration of adversary logistics, achieved through meticulous planning and execution, as a timeless blueprint for current aerial operations. Yet, as you look closer, this devastating event forces you to confront deeply unsettling truths about the brutal reality of contemporary armed conflict. Even though those Axis cargo planes were legally valid targets hauling crucial materials to hostile troops, they were simultaneously packed with human beings, including unarmed medics and clerks who met a gruesome end in the burning wreckage. The United States aviators who executed this mission wrestled with profound psychological burdens afterward. They had fulfilled their orders flawlessly, but the utter lack of parity in the fight left many feeling profoundly uneasy, since obliterating largely unprotected transport vessels stripped away the traditional prestige associated with classic dogfights. These ethical dilemmas perfectly illustrate how armed struggle transitioned from the romanticized duels of the past into a terrifying era of mechanized, mass-scale obliteration. The Allied aviators were not hunting for personal prestige. They simply executed an assigned objective with lethal efficiency and absolute method, acting without malice, but also without any leniency, which underscored the face of modern warfare as something cold, heavily reliant on machinery, and overwhelmingly destructive. For those who study military strategy, this slaughter reinforces crucial maxims. Securing unmatched information allows for triumphs that far exceed the actual number of troops deployed. Establishing dominance in the skies guarantees the systematic dismantling of a rival's supply chains, and possessing robust manufacturing and training frameworks ultimately decides the outcome of protracted struggles. Furthermore, the engagement starkly highlighted the extreme peril of attempting aerial resupply missions without first controlling the airspace above, prompting contemporary defense organizations to pour immense resources into safeguarding their cargo fleets. Above all, this catastrophic afternoon over Cape Bon revealed how rapidly the balance of power can invert, as the Luftwaffe, an organization that wielded absolute authority over European skies from 1939 to 1941, found itself utterly defenseless by 1943. This shocking reversal proves that no tactical advantage lasts forever, making constant evolution an absolute necessity, and ensuring that the shockwaves of a battle that concluded in merely 15 minutes would echo throughout the remainder of the war and long into the future. During that brief window of time, United States combat pilots did much more than merely wreck a fleet of enemy transport planes. They announced the arrival of American aviation as an unstoppable juggernaut that would command the global stage for decades. Axis commanders, completely stunned that their squadrons could be decimated so rapidly, were forced to digest a terrifying new paradigm of combat as they witnessed a fully mobilized democratic society unleash a level of devastation that totalitarian states simply could not replicate. This brutal slaughter decisively demonstrated that combining advanced machinery, rigorous drill routines, and massive production networks could effortlessly crush seasoned veterans, solitary talent, and fierce ideological zeal. The Allied forces had effectively transformed combat into a cold, hard science. And this calculated approach was obliterating the romanticized warrior ethos that had initially propelled Axis troops to their early triumphs. Consequently, historians look back on the events of April 18, 1943, as a definitive turning point in the history of flight, where in a mere quarter of an hour, American interceptors ravaged between 59 and 70 enemy machines. The precise tally of downed aircraft mattered far less than the resulting psychological trauma, as crippling the Luftwaffe's logistical backbone in the Mediterranean theater, directly accelerated the ultimate downfall of Axis units scattered across North Africa. Even more crucially, the encounter validated the entire framework of United States military philosophy, proving that blending rigorous schooling with top-tier equipment and seamless intelligence gathering inevitably leads to absolute control of the battlefield. The youthful Allied airmen, whom fascist propagandists had previously dismissed as the soft offspring of a failing democratic system, unexpectedly revealed themselves to be incredibly deadly combatants. Staring at the astonishing magnitude of their defeat, Axis leaders realized they were facing a structural shift rather than a simple battlefield setback, witnessing the dawn of an American hegemony that would shape the rest of the century, as the very republic they'd constantly ridiculed forged combatants far superior to anything their own fanaticism could conjure. Ultimately, when you analyze this event through a professional lens, it remains the ultimate case study in projecting aerospace power, reinforcing how superior data processing, technological leverage, and manufacturing might coalesce into undeniable combat effectiveness. When the Axis pilots originally departed from Tunisia on that fateful afternoon, they anticipated a completely unremarkable journey back to Sicily, fully trusting their seasoned fighter escorts to keep them safe from harm. Instead, a fleeting 15 minutes of intense violence shattered both their aircraft and their confidence, marking the definitive end of the chivalric era and ushering in a ruthless new age of mechanized warfare that would permanently alter the skies. A new era of methodical, technologically driven aerial dominance had officially dawned. The utter shock experienced by the German forces was entirely justified, as they struggled to comprehend the catastrophe that had just unfolded. What they had observed was far more profound than a simple military loss. It marked the genesis of an American dominance in the skies that would permanently alter the global balance of power. Ultimately, the catastrophic event known as the Palm Sunday Massacre laid bare a core principle of contemporary combat. Triumph was no longer solely the domain of the most courageous or seasoned soldiers, but rather the reward for those capable of seamlessly fusing strategic intelligence, advanced technology, rigorous preparation, and sheer industrial might into an unstoppable force. High above the striking azure expanse of the Mediterranean Sea, on April 18, 1943, aviators from the United States showcased this stark reality with absolute and ruinous precision. Whether the opposition could fathom the magnitude of this slaughter was completely inconsequential to the grim facts of the situation. Their aircraft lay in ruins, their personnel had perished, and the ultimate resolution of the global conflict was becoming undeniably clear. Even today, the enduring impact of those crucial 15 minutes spent battling in the skies above Cape Bon profoundly shapes contemporary strategic doctrines. Global military aviation branches continually analyze this specific clash to extract vital insights regarding the absolute necessity of controlling the skies, the inherent fragility of aerial logistical fleets, and the critical role that precise reconnaissance plays in modern conflicts. Ultimately, the Palm Sunday Massacre transcended a mere localized triumph on the battlefield. It served as a terrifyingly effective blueprint, illustrating exactly how future armed struggles would be waged and secured throughout the modern era.